Have you ever stopped to think that faith, the very thing that should set people free, has also built prisons? That the same force that inspires love and resilience has also justified wars, oppression, and broken lives? Faith is not as innocent as many assume. The real question is not, do you believe? But what do you believe in? Because everyone has faith in something, and sometimes that something can destroy. Most people imagine faith as a purely religious issue, but in reality, even the skeptic lives by faith. Faith in science, in ideologies, in success, in human relationships, or in themselves. The truth is unsettling. Nobody lives without trust. And when that trust is misplaced, tragedy is not just possible, it's inevitable. That's why this topic is so uncomfortable, yet so necessary. Because it forces us to face a disturbing fact. The problem is not the absence of faith, but the object of it. When misplaced, faith becomes toxic, even deadly. It manipulates, blinds, and enslaves. And history proves it. Wrong beliefs have always paved the way to collective disaster. But there's another side. Properly directed, faith becomes the most powerful engine of transformation a human being can experience. It organizes priorities, strengthens character, restores relationships, and sustains hope even when everything else collapses. That's the paradox. Faith can either build or destroy. It depends entirely on where it's placed. So take a deep breath, because what you're about to see is not a comfortable message. It will challenge your assumptions, confront illusions, and maybe even expose idols you didn't know you had. But if you stay with me until the end, I promise you this: you'll never look at faith the same way again. Before we continue, if you enjoy our videos and feel that they have blessed your life, like and comment. Even if it's just a amen, this makes a huge difference in helping this content reach more people and impact lives. If you are not subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share with your loved ones. This way, YouTube will get to know you better and suggest even more videos like this to help you on your faith journey. Help spread this message of faith and hope. Every like, comment, and share strengthens this work, which we do with all our love to build up your life. Together, we can reach even more hearts. Continuing, faith is often confused with religious belief, as if it were the exclusive property of those who profess a creed. But in reality, faith is a universal human faculty. Everyone, without exception, builds life upon assumptions that cannot be fully proven. The one who prays and the one who denies the existence of God both operate under the same structure: the need to attribute meaning, value, and direction to life. Faith is not only about eternity, it is about every choice that guides our existence. Think about it. The skeptic who trusts in logic is exercising faith in reason. The entrepreneur who invests in a project is exercising faith in the future. The mother who believes her child will grow healthy invests faith in care and time. Faith is a constant. What changes is its object. It is this object that determines whether faith elevates or destroys, whether it liberates or enslaves. No one escapes this reality. That is why the right question is not "do you believe?" but "what do you believe in?" Because even those who call themselves atheists are relying on invisible premises, such as the reliability of memory, the consistency of consciousness, and the value of existence itself. Faith is, in essence, the structure that sustains our perception of the world. Whoever recognizes this discovers that living without faith is impossible. The only thing possible is to choose in what or in whom to place it. What makes faith fascinating is its subtlety. Many imagine they live without faith simply because they are not religious. However, their decisions, whether in traffic, in relationships, or in business, are full of invisible trusts. Believing that the bus will arrive, that the doctor knows what he is doing, or that a promise made by a friend is true. All this is faith in action. To live is to believe, whether one admits it or not. This perspective removes the illusion of neutrality. No one is exempt from belief. The person who claims to rely only on what is provable is already believing in the limits of their own method. The one who claims to live only for the present is already placing faith in the idea that tomorrow will take care of itself. Every philosophy, every ideology, every personal conviction is, at its core, a form of faith. Thus, faith ceases to be merely a spiritual concept and becomes a tool of life. It explains why some find strength to persevere while others collapse under the same pressure. It reveals why some, when everything falls apart, still have hope, while others are consumed by despair. Faith then is not a distant luxury, but a living necessity. And here comes the big question. If everyone believes, then what is the quality of what they believe in? This is the reflection that opens the door to the next point. The true question is not, do you have faith? But where is your faith directed? The human heart was created to trust. The problem is that trust cannot remain in a vacuum. It always lands somewhere. That is why the right question is never whether someone believes, but what exactly they believe in. Because at the end of the day, no one lives without a center of confidence. Whoever loses faith in one thing transfers it to another. From God to science misunderstood, from eternity to success, from community to individualism. The object of faith changes, but the act of believing remains. When someone says they lost their faith, what usually happened was only a transfer of its object. The one who once believed in God may now believe in chance, in luck, or in himself. The one who abandoned religion may now kneel at the altar of ideologies or careers. Faith does not disappear. It only changes throne. And it is precisely this throne that reveals what in practice governs a life. The consequence of this is visible in everyday life. When faith is placed in unstable things, the person also becomes unstable. Whoever makes success their God is devastated by failure. Whoever idolizes relationships is destroyed when abandoned. Whoever worships pleasure is consumed by emptiness after ecstasy. In all cases, the object of faith proves fragile, and the life built upon it collapses like a house without foundation. On the other hand, when faith is correctly directed, the opposite happens. Confidence in God reorganizes priorities, aligns affections, and restores balance. The heart ceases to be a pendulum between highs and lows and becomes anchored in stability. This does not mean the absence of struggles, but the presence of a reference point that does not change with the winds of circumstance. A stable object produces a stable life. The deepest truth is that everyone already believes in something. The student believes in the value of knowledge, the professional in the return of effort, the friend in loyalty, the activist in the cause. What needs to be evaluated is whether these things are capable of sustaining existence when the storms come. The strength of a belief is measured not by comfort in good days, but by resilience in days of trial. That is why it is urgent to ask oneself, what is occupying the throne of my faith today? Because it is from this throne that decisions emerge, that affections are defined, that life is organized. A misplaced object of faith enslaves. A correct object frees. The throne is always occupied. What changes is who sits on it, and it is here that the concept of ultimate concern appears. The supreme object that reorganizes all priorities and becomes, in practice, the functional God of life. That is what leads us directly to the next point. Every person, consciously or not, has something that occupies the highest place of importance in their life. It may be money, recognition, pleasure, power, or God himself. Paul Tillich called it the ultimate concern, that which sits on the throne of the heart and silently governs everything else. This ultimate concern does not remain theoretical. It reorganizes priorities, determines values, and even shapes the emotions of daily life. If someone places success as their ultimate concern, all decisions will orbit around career advancement. If the supreme object is romance, then every choice will bend to please or preserve the beloved. If it is reputation, the person will live enslaved to others' opinions. And if it is God, then everything else will become aligned with His will. Identifying this ultimate concern is like discovering the invisible axis around which life spins. The challenge is that many people never stop to analyze their own ultimate concern. They live life as if priorities were casual, when in fact every action reveals who or what truly sits on the throne. The heart does not tolerate a vacuum. If God is not there, something else will occupy the seat. And what occupies that seat becomes, in practice, the functional God of the person. This explains why some people lose everything, yet remain serene, while others collapse when they lose a single possession. It is not about the size of the loss, but about whether the object of faith could withstand it. Whoever places ultimate trust in the eternal does not despair with temporary losses. But whoever clings to what is perishable will fall apart when that idol is taken away. The quality of life depends directly on the quality of the ultimate concern. An everyday example makes this clear. A person who idolizes beauty will despair when time brings wrinkles. A person who idolizes wealth will panic when the economy shifts. But one who trusts in God remains firm, because the foundation does not erode with time. The throne occupied by what is eternal generates lasting stability. The throne occupied by what is temporary guarantees collapse. That is why examining one's ultimate concern is not a philosophical luxury, but a practical necessity. It is like checking the foundations of a house before a storm. Many only realize where their faith was when life's winds sweep away everything they trusted. The throne was always occupied. It only revealed its weakness when tested, and that opens the way for the next reflection. There are different layers of faith, and understanding them helps us discern how trust operates in our everyday choices. Faith does not always manifest in the same way. It unfolds into layers that reveal both its greatness and its danger. The first layer is salvific faith, the trust that rests in God, capable of transforming character and destiny. The second layer is everyday faith, the trust that guides ordinary decisions, like taking a bus, believing in a forecast, or planning a new project. The third layer is destructive faith, trust in lies or idols that instead of giving life, lead to ruin. Salvific faith is what anchors a person beyond circumstances. It is the confidence that no matter how fierce the storm, there is a secure foundation in God. It does not depend on moods or situations, but transforms the person from the inside out. It shapes character, reorganizes priorities, and leads to a maturity that withstands life's tests. It is this faith that sustains when everything else collapses. Everyday faith, on the other hand, is the one we often do not notice, but without it, we could not live. Boarding a plane, taking medicine, believing in the traffic light, these are all acts of daily faith. They may seem trivial, but they prove that no one lives without trust. This layer shows that faith is not just for the extraordinary. It is a constant that sustains daily existence, but there is also destructive faith, and here lies the danger. When someone trusts in false promises, in ideologies that dehumanize, or in leaders who manipulate, faith becomes a tool of destruction. It blinds reason, justifies injustices, and leads to moral or social ruin. This type of faith proves that believing in the wrong thing can be worse than not believing at all. It is the dark side of the same faculty that, when well-directed, brings life. An example is fanaticism. People who believe blindly in a cause or leader end up committing acts they would never commit alone. The power of destructive faith is that it enslaves and seduces, giving the illusion of purpose while consuming freedom. This layer shows that faith is always powerful. It can either save or destroy depending on its object. Understanding these three layers helps us evaluate our own trust. Salvific faith restores. Everyday faith sustains. Destructive faith corrupts. And the line between them is often subtle, demanding discernment to distinguish what is healthy from what is toxic. That is why examining the object of our faith is not optional. It is urgent. And here comes the next insight. Whether we want it or not, believing is inevitable. Even the one who claims not to believe is already relying on things they cannot see or prove. That is where we will go next. Even the most hardened skeptic cannot live without faith. Life itself demands daily bets on things that cannot be fully proven. No one sees the reliability of memory, but everyone trusts it. No one proves with absolute certainty that the sun will rise tomorrow, but everyone organizes life as if it will. These invisible assumptions form the basis of existence. Denying faith is impossible. At best, it can be ignored or mislabeled. The philosopher who claims to live only by reason already trusts in premises he cannot prove, that logic is valid, that consciousness is real, that reality is not an illusion. The scientist who conducts an experiment assumes the reliability of his senses and of nature's consistency. The skeptic who dismisses faith already believes in his own doubts. Faith is not the opposite of reason. It is the ground that makes reason possible. This makes belief a universal structure, not a religious detail. The atheist who sits in a chair trusts that it will not collapse. The student who takes a test trusts that what he studied will be remembered. The patient who takes medicine trusts in the competence of the doctor and the effectiveness of the drug. None of this is seen. It is all faith in practice. To live is to believe, even when one denies it. What makes the difference then is not whether a person believes, but where they place their faith. The one who trusts only in himself is vulnerable to his own limits. The one who trusts blindly in ideologies is vulnerable to manipulation. The one who trusts in God is anchored in something beyond human fragility. Believing is inevitable, but the object of belief determines the outcome. An everyday example illustrates this. Crossing the street. No one sees the brake mechanism of a car, but everyone trusts it will work. This faith is not irrational, it is necessary. Likewise, trusting in God does not mean abandoning reason. It means anchoring it in something greater than its own capacity. The same mechanism that sustains daily actions can also sustain eternal hope. That is why the denial of faith is never honest. It is only a change of object. Whoever says, "I have no faith," is already practicing it, whether in science, in self-confidence, in the future, or in chance. The human condition does not allow the absence of belief. It only allows different ways of naming it. And it is here that imagination enters as a key factor. What you choose to cultivate in your inner world determines what you will see in the outer world. This will take us to the next step. The human mind is like a lens. It sees what it decides to focus on. This is why imagination is so powerful in shaping faith. If someone constantly repeats that life is unfair, the mind begins to filter reality to confirm that belief. If someone cultivates gratitude, the same reality begins to be perceived with different colors. The imagination does not invent facts, but it amplifies and selects them, creating a worldview consistent with inner beliefs. A simple example is the red car effect. When you buy a red car, suddenly it seems like every car on the street is red. They were always there, but the mind was not trained to notice them. Faith works the same way. If the heart cultivates pessimism, life will look increasingly gray. If it cultivates hope, opportunities begin to appear where before there was only despair. What you believe shapes what you see. That is why imagination is not a luxury, but a battlefield. Whoever feeds negative images and destructive narratives will end up imprisoned by them. Whoever nurtures uplifting visions and positive convictions will find strength to endure. The mind searches for patterns that confirm what it already expects. Faith and imagination together create a filter through which reality is interpreted. This explains why some people in the same situation collapse while others thrive. It is not the external circumstances that differ, but the inner lens. The same storm can drown one person and train another. The difference lies in what the imagination chooses to highlight. Faith, therefore, is not passive. It is an active filter that decides which reality will be perceived. A practical exercise helps here. Write down for a week the main thoughts that come when you face challenges. Are they thoughts of defeat or confidence? This record will reveal the lens through which life is being interpreted. Changing the imagination changes the perception, and changing perception changes the outcome. That is why faith is deeply linked to imagination. It is not about inventing fantasies, but about deciding which filter will govern the interpretation of facts. Whoever cultivates despair will harvest despair. Whoever cultivates trust will harvest resilience. The imagination is the soil. Faith is the seed that grows in it. And this leads us to the next insight. When faith disconnects from reason, it degenerates into credulity. And when reason disconnects from faith, it degenerates into cynicism. That is the balance we must explore next. Faith and reason are not enemies. They are partners that balance each other. When faith detaches from reason, it turns into gullibility, believing anything without discernment. But when reason detaches from faith, it turns into cynicism, disbelieving everything, even what is true and beautiful. Both extremes dehumanize, because gullibility enslaves and cynicism dries up the soul. True wisdom integrates faith and reason, without idolizing either one in isolation. The gullible person believes in promises that cannot be sustained. They are easy prey for manipulators, fake gurus, and dangerous ideologies. Reason would protect them, but since they despise it, they fall into traps that could have been avoided. The cynical person, on the other hand, uses reason to destroy even what is solid. They live in skepticism so extreme that nothing deserves trust. Their life becomes sterile, without wonder, without openness to the transcendent. What faith offers to reason is horizon. What reason offers to faith is structure. The faith that trusts in God does not fear being tested, because truth never fears the light. At the same time, reason alone cannot give meaning to life. It can analyze and deconstruct, but it cannot fill the heart with purpose. That is why faith and reason need each other. Faith prevents reason from shrinking into despair, and reason prevents faith from degenerating into fantasy. An example makes this clear. The person who believes in any miracle without evaluating the evidence may waste time and resources. But the one who disbelieves in every possibility of miracle becomes blind to the unexpected ways in which God acts. The first becomes naive. The second becomes bitter. The healthy posture is balance, a faith that resists examination, and a reason that remains open to transcendence. This balance is also necessary in daily life. In work, for example, having faith in one's capacity is essential, but without reason, it may lead to reckless choices. On the other hand, reason alone calculates risks, but never dares to take them. Progress is born from the union of both, faith that dares and reason that organizes. History shows that the greatest advances came from those who united imagination with discipline, conviction with logic. In the spiritual realm, the same applies. A worship that despises reason becomes fanaticism. A religion that despises faith becomes sterile intellectualism. The biblical faith, however, integrates both. It is rational without being dry and experiential without being irrational. It is this integration that produces maturity and authenticity. And it is precisely here that the warning becomes necessary. Beware of any authority that asks you to give up reason in exchange for belonging. That is where the next reflection takes us. One of the most dangerous traps of distorted faith is the demand for blind obedience. Leaders, groups, or ideologies that ask you to suspend reason and just believe usually have ulterior motives. They demand surrender without questioning, as if critical thinking were a threat. But a faith that cannot endure honest questions is already showing that it is fragile. True faith invites dialogue. Manipulation prohibits it. When someone says, "You must not ask, you must only obey," the next step is usually moral manipulation. First, reason is silenced. Soon after, conscience is silenced. The result is a community where loyalty to the leader becomes greater than loyalty to truth. History is full of examples of sects, political movements, and even religious institutions that enslaved people through this demand for blind belonging. The danger is subtle because the desire to belong is legitimate. Everyone wants to feel part of something greater. The manipulator exploits this longing by offering acceptance in exchange for intellectual and moral submission. The group becomes family, but a family that controls instead of liberates. The price of inclusion is the death of freedom. An everyday example helps here. A person who joins a group where questions are discouraged soon finds themselves repeating speeches they do not even understand. The fear of being excluded is so strong that they prefer silence to honesty. The group offers security, but at the cost of individuality. This trade-off seems convenient at first, but soon becomes suffocating. A healthy faith does not fear questions. Jesus himself invited people to reason. Come, let us reason together. The scriptures challenge and encourage testing everything, keeping what is good. Any authority that demands absolute loyalty without space for questioning is not a guide, but a controller. True leaders lead by example, not by silencing consciences. That is why discernment is essential. Whenever a group demands that you surrender reason to belong, take a step back and ask, what am I really being asked to give up? Belonging at the cost of freedom is not love. It is imprisonment disguised as community, and it is exactly here that another layer of danger emerges. When the throne of the heart is occupied not by God, but by idols disguised as absolutes. That takes us to the next point. Many people imagine idolatry as something ancient, tied to people bowing before carved statues. But in practice, it is much more sophisticated and contemporary. Idolatry is simply transferring trust to anything that takes God's place in the heart. It could be success, beauty, career, romance, power, or even social media status. The problem is not valuing these things, but elevating them to absolutes. When that happens, life becomes disordered and the soul becomes enslaved. An everyday example illustrates this well. Someone who makes career their idol measures their own worth by their job title. If they get promoted, they feel invincible. If fired, they lose their ground. Those who idolize relationships seek in another person a completeness no human being can provide. The result is always frustration, because no person can bear the weight of being deified. Idolatry is not just a theological issue, but a practical one. It reveals who you hand the keys of your well-being to. The curious thing is that idolatry never presents itself openly. No one says, I worship my money as a god. Instead, it hides in statements like, without this, I can't live, or I'll only be happy when I have that, or if I lose this, my life loses meaning. These phrases reveal the true altar of the heart. And the problem is that this altar shapes identity, decisions, and inevitably, outcomes. In the end, each person becomes like what they worship. Take the example of those who idolize their bodies. At first, discipline brings health. But when obsession takes over, even the smallest lapse leads to despair. The same happens to those who idolize approval from others. They live for likes, applause, and recognition, but never find rest. Idolatry always charges a high toll. It demands sacrifices of time, relationships, and even health. It's like an unspoken contract. You give it all, and in return, it offers crumbs of satisfaction. By contrast, when trust is placed in God, the dynamic flips. He does not exploit, he restores. True faith reorganizes priorities, brings freedom instead of bondage, and teaches how to use things without being used by them. Money becomes a tool, not a master. The body becomes a temple, not a prison. Work becomes a mission, not a tyrant. The shift is so profound that it reshapes one's view of the world and even the way crises are handled. A practical exercise to uncover idols is to ask, what, if taken from me, would make life lose its meaning? Or what makes me more anxious? losing time with God, or losing a chance at recognition? These questions expose the hidden altars. The next step is to reposition trust, putting each thing in its rightful place and letting only the eternal occupy the central throne. And idolatry is rarely just individual. It often multiplies in groups, creating collective movements around causes, leaders, or ideologies. When masses transfer their trust to something that cannot sustain it, the results are devastating. Which leads us directly into the next point, the power and danger of collective faith. Human beings cannot live isolated. They need belonging. And it is in this collective space that faith gains double strength, because it feeds off the energy of the group. Durkheim once said that social cohesion creates an electric current, capable of driving actions an individual alone would never dare. When faith becomes collective, it offers identity, courage, and direction. The problem is that the same power that builds healthy communities can also be used to manipulate crowds. A simple example is a stadium full of fans. Alone, a supporter might not shout as loud, but in the middle of the crowd, they feel overtaken by a greater force. The same mechanism occurs in religious settings, political rallies, and even corporate environments. Belonging generates courage, but it also diminishes the ability to question. People feel part of something greater, and to keep that sense of security, they silence their reason. The group can be a refuge, but it can also become a prison. When collective faith is rightly directed, extraordinary things happen. Social movements that fought for justice were born out of a shared conviction that change was possible. Communities of faith that unite to serve the poor and care for the needy demonstrate the bright side of this power. But when collective faith is placed in the wrong object, it produces monstrosities, wars, persecutions, and even genocides justified by blind trust in leaders and ideologies. The danger of collective faith lies in the emotional mechanism it activates, the sense of security at the cost of discernment. Freud called this the search for a father substitute. When the crowd finds a charismatic leader, they transfer to him all trust and obey without question. In the process, the individual dissolves into the mass and loses personal responsibility. This is where fanaticism, political idolatry, and religious distortions are born. A practical test to discern whether collective faith is healthy is to ask, does this group allow questions? Is there space for disagreement? Does it value individual conscience? If the answer is no, that is a red flag. Groups that cannot tolerate honest questioning are more interested in control than in truth. And when the desire to belong surpasses the desire to think, faith stops being a force of life and becomes a tool of manipulation. That explains why even intelligent people fall into the traps of crowds. It is not stupidity, it is the legitimate need for belonging. Everyone wants to feel part of something greater. Everyone wants to feel validated. The problem is, when this desire is exploited by leaders or systems skilled in manipulating emotions. The result is a collective faith that looks strong, but in practice only transfers power to those who should not have it. And when the soul loses its true father, it starts looking for substitute fathers in human leaders, ideologies, or affections that cannot bear the weight of such trust. That opens the door for the next crucial point, how helplessness breeds emotional servitude. When the soul loses its anchor and feels helpless, a void emerges that cries out to be filled. It is in this space that false emotional dependencies are born, those that promise safety but enslave. Fragile people in search of a safe harbor end up submitting to authoritarian leaders, abusive relationships, or totalitarian ideologies. The needy heart accepts pet tyrants because being ruled seems easier than facing the weight of living without direction. This kind of servitude doesn't appear suddenly. It creeps in, subtle and seductive. The manipulator offers affection, attention, or belonging, and little by little demands blind loyalty. How many times have we heard someone say, "I know this person hurts me, but I just can't leave"? Helplessness transforms the oppressor into refuge, twisting roles in a cruel inversion. It's as if the soul whispers, "I'd rather stay with familiar pain than risk the unknown of freedom." This dynamic surfaces not only in relationships, but in social and spiritual settings too. An authoritarian ruler may present himself as the father of the nation, demanding obedience in exchange for protection. In relationships, an abuser offers conditional affection while fueling fear of abandonment. Even in religion, leaders may manipulate guilt to keep followers trapped in their system. Helplessness opens the door, and emotional servitude slips in disguised as love. But there is a way out. The first step is to recognize the mechanism, to understand that what appears as love or care may in reality be nothing more than control. The second is to rediscover a point of trust greater than any human. When someone reconciles with the living God, they no longer need human saviors to feel complete. That doesn't remove the need for relationships, but it frees from the bondage of turning people into idols. Practical examples abound. Many who overcame emotional dependency testify that therapy and spirituality helped them redefine boundaries. They learned they could say no without losing their value, that they could step away without falling apart. Reconnecting with the true Father restored their autonomy. What once was a prison became a classroom, and what once felt like abandonment became an opportunity to grow. This can be practiced daily. Ask yourself, in which situations do I submit out of fear of losing affection? Or whom do I treat as the only source of value in my life? These questions reveal where helplessness may be forging invisible chains. Naming these chains is already the first step to breaking them. Awareness itself weakens manipulation's grip, but the danger of misplaced faith is not only individual. History shows that wrong beliefs have commanded entire societies toward tragedy. And that is where the next point takes us, how misguided faith becomes fuel for collective catastrophes. Human history is an open book about the power and peril of misdirected faith. Ideas that seemed harmless when embraced as collective beliefs unleashed devastating consequences. Look at totalitarian regimes that promised redemption through political ideologies, but ended in wars and genocides. Faith in nationalist myths, racial superiority, or near-divinized leaders proved that believing in the wrong thing isn't merely naive, it is deadly. One stark example is Nazism. Millions, driven by blind belief in a superior race, cooperated with unspeakable atrocities. It wasn't a lack of collective reason, but reason hijacked by distorted faith. The same mechanism appeared in other ages, when empires justified slavery in the name of progress, or when crusades and religious wars were waged in the name of faith stripped of its essence. Ideas have consequences, and beliefs shape destinies, but we don't need to look only at the past. Even today, misguided beliefs continue to drive crowds towards smaller but equally destructive tragedies. Faith in money as the ultimate solution creates systems of exploitation. Faith in technology as the world's savior breeds dependent and anxious generations. Faith in instant pleasure fuels cycles of emptiness and addiction. Each of these may look promising at first, but they end in exhaustion. The pattern repeats. Misplaced trust always exacts a high price. That's why it is naive to think that too much faith is the problem. The danger isn't intensity but direction. Someone may believe deeply in something false and destroy themselves and others. Meanwhile, another person may have fragile faith in something true and yet find life. The central issue is not how much faith, but where it is placed. History pokes us, urging us to examine our foundations. If we want to learn from the past, we must ask, what ideas today are being turned into absolutes? Where is society depositing its faith uncritically? It could be in political ideologies, digital gurus, self-help promises, or consumerist narratives. When a discourse becomes untouchable and unquestionable, we may be staring at a new modern idol, ready to replay ancient tragedies in updated form. This lesson is personal as well. Each individual carries the responsibility of examining where their trust lies. Even if consequences in history are collective, everything begins in the heart of one person. A life built on misplaced faith not only harms the believer, but spreads damage to those around them. That is why diagnosing the nature of personal faith is as urgent as analyzing societies, which naturally brings us to the next step: how to make a practical diagnosis of the fruits that faith is producing in your life. Because the results of faith are always visible in everyday outcomes. Faith is not abstract. It always leaves fingerprints on daily life. One can claim to believe in many things, but in the end, what really matters are the fruits. If faith generates arrogance, manipulation, or dishonesty, then something is wrong at the root. If, on the other hand, it produces love, humility, perseverance, and justice, then its foundation is solid. The Bible itself teaches that faith without works is dead, precisely because genuine trust in God inevitably spills into visible attitudes. Think about it. Someone who says they trust God but treats others with contempt is already contradicting their own confession. Another, who claims to believe in truth but justifies lies for convenience, is exposing that their true faith is not in God, but in results. That's why it's not the speech that counts, but the evidence. Just as a tree is recognized by its fruit, faith is recognized by its consequences. This is the simplest and most honest diagnostic test anyone can apply. For example, a person who trusts God will likely demonstrate patience in crises because their center is stable. Someone who trusts in money will panic when the market falls. The difference is not temperament, but where the roots of faith are planted. That is why adversity functions as a revealer. It unmasks the true object of trust. Hardships are not meant to destroy faith, but to expose what really sustains it. A practical exercise here is journaling about recent decisions. What guided them? Fear, pride, appearance, or faith anchored in truth. Looking at patterns, one sees whether their faith has been constructive or destructive. If most choices produce division, dishonesty, or arrogance, there is a warning sign. If they produce reconciliation, integrity, and peace, then the roots are aligned with the eternal. Simple but transformative. The fruits of faith also manifest in how one relates to others. A person with genuine faith will build bridges, not walls. They will promote justice without trampling others. They will forgive, not because it is easy, but because they know they have also been forgiven. These fruits are not optional virtues, but natural consequences of a faith that really connects with God. It is important to highlight, no one produces perfect fruits all the time. The question is not perfection, but direction. What is the dominant pattern of your life? Where does your faith push you when no one is watching? The diagnosis does not condemn, it invites realignment. Every diagnosis is the starting point for healing, and this leads to the next point. Intellectual development also requires spiritual rooting. Without that, knowledge becomes vulnerability, not strength. Many people think that studying, reading, and deepening intellectual knowledge is enough to secure their life. But without spiritual rooting, intellectual formation is like a building without a foundation. It can be beautiful on the outside, but at the first tremor, it collapses. Knowledge without grounding in faith becomes a fertile ground for arrogance, emptiness, and even manipulation. That is why history is full of geniuses who, without spiritual balance, contributed to destruction instead of construction. Reading critics, philosophers, and thinkers is essential, but it requires a filter. Without a firm spiritual axis, the individual ends up embracing any brilliant idea that appears without questioning its consequences. They become enchanted by the new, seduced by the complex, or imprisoned by the fashionable. Knowledge, instead of liberating, enslaves, because it was not tested in the light of a transcendent foundation. A clear example is the student who dives into contemporary philosophies without having roots in eternal truths. They become fascinated by discourses that appear liberating, but in practice imprison. They confuse relativism with freedom, skepticism with intelligence. What should expand horizons ends up shrinking meaning. That's why intellectual growth must walk hand in hand with spiritual rooting so that mind and heart are aligned. Practical application is simple. When studying any subject, ask yourself, does this align with what elevates and humanizes, or does it drag me down? Reading history, for example, is powerful, but without spiritual grounding, one may fall into bitterness about humanity. Reading philosophy is enriching, but without a compass, one may get lost in endless speculation. Reading literature is beautiful, but without discernment, one may confuse fantasy with life's true purpose. That doesn't mean rejecting study, on the contrary. It means studying with even greater openness. The difference is that a rooted mind knows how to extract the good without swallowing the poison. It welcomes criticism, but does not lose faith. It recognizes beauty in culture, but does not turn culture into an idol. This posture creates not only intellectual maturity, but also resilience in times of crisis. Great figures in history illustrate this integration. Thinkers who combined deep knowledge with solid spirituality left a legacy of wisdom, not only information. They knew that intelligence without purpose is like a lamp without oil. It shines for a moment but soon goes out. What sustains brilliance is rooting in what is eternal. And this brings us to the biblical concept of faith that goes beyond mere optimism. The hypostasis described in Hebrews 11, which defines faith as the very title deed of the future. In the biblical perspective, faith is not a vague optimism or a wishful thought. Hebrews 11 defines it as hypostasis, something like a title deed of what is yet to come. Imagine buying land you haven't set foot on yet, but the legal document guarantees it is already yours. That is what faith in God's promises is, an anticipation of reality, a guarantee that the future is secure, even when the present denies it. It is not fantasy. It is a certainty anchored in the character of the one who promises. Think of the Roman military diploma. When a soldier retired, he received a document guaranteeing citizenship and privileges not yet experienced. That parchment was the already but not yet. In the same way, faith is this anticipation. The believer holds in hand the guarantee of an inheritance promised by God, even though daily life still faces contradiction, pain, and limitation. Faith does not deny reality, but sees beyond it. This perspective changes everything. While the world treats faith as an emotional escape, the scriptures describe it as a legal act. God himself signs the contract and assures that the future is already secured. That is why biblical faith sustains in crises. It doesn't depend on present circumstances, but on eternal certainties. When the ground shakes, the title deed reminds the soul, the future is already yours. Examples abound in Scripture. Abraham walked without knowing where he was going, but trusted the promise. Moses abandoned the luxuries of Egypt, confident that God's plan was greater. The early Christians resisted persecution, not because they were naive, but because they knew they already possessed something indestructible. Faith was not a hunch, but a guarantee of eternal heritage. Applying this concept today is liberating. Those who trust in God don't live hostage to immediate results. They can sow with patience, endure with hope, and even suffer with resilience, knowing that the story does not end here. Their lives gain depth because their horizon extends beyond time. Faith then becomes the antidote to despair and the compass for daily decisions. In practice, this means cultivating trust even when everything seems contradictory. For example, continuing to invest in honesty at work, even when dishonesty seems to bring quicker gains. Or persisting in generosity, even when scarcity whispers the opposite. These choices are signs of faith acting as a title deed. The person acts today as if tomorrow is already secure. And this naturally opens the way to the next point. Faith is not static. It requires movement. Believing is not sitting still. It is walking as Abraham did. That is why the next reflection is that faith is inseparable from obedience. Faith is not a theory, it is a path. To believe is to take steps, even when the map is incomplete. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where he was going, and that is the essence of biblical faith. It moves forward despite uncertainty. Belief without action is like a body without breath, illusory. Obedience is the tangible body of faith. Without it, conviction remains just a beautiful idea floating in the mind. This becomes clear in daily life. It is easy to say, "I trust," but the test lies in action. The person who claims to trust God but continues to cheat in business reveals that their faith is only verbal. The one who claims to believe in forgiveness but clings to resentment demonstrates the same. Faith manifests not in speeches but in concrete decisions. Obedience is the visible trail of invisible trust. But obedience is not blind submission, it is a conscious act. It integrates prayer, reflection, and discernment. Faith does not eliminate doubt, it walks through it. The one who believes does not pretend to have all answers, but takes steps aligned with what they know of God's character. It is not recklessness, it is trust in action. That is why faith matures through obedience. Each step strengthens confidence for the next one. Examples make this vivid. A student who studies with dedication, trusting that their effort will bear fruit, demonstrates faith in practice. A parent who chooses integrity over easy shortcuts shows the same. Faith is walking with a compass, not standing still with a map. It is active trust that reshapes routines, decisions, and even long-term plans. This perspective also transforms failures. When obedience falters, faith does not end. It rises, realigns, and continues. The biblical journey is full of men and women who stumbled but kept walking. The essence of faith is not perfection, but perseverance in direction. Obedience today may be fragile, but tomorrow it grows as conviction deepens. Practicing this requires small but firm actions. Begin with daily decisions, honesty in speech, responsibility in commitments, generosity in relationships. Each step becomes a declaration of faith. Over time, these steps form a path that defines character. And what once seemed like a small choice becomes the architecture of a transformed life. And this leads to the next point. Faith is not just the beginning of the walk, it is the resilience that sustains the journey. What truly tests faith is not the extraordinary, but fidelity in the ordinary. The true test of faith is not found in spectacular moments, but in the silent, daily perseverance that few notice. Resistance is faith stretched over time, faithfulness in the small things, when applause is absent and recognition is invisible. It is the discipline of continuing to pray, work, and do good, even when results do not come immediately. That is why the heroes of faith are not only those who performed miracles, but those who endured hardship without abandoning trust. Think of prisoners of conscience who resisted oppressive regimes. They were not in stadiums, they had no audience, but their fidelity in secret became light for future generations. Faith that resists in the ordinary proves its authenticity more than faith that shines in the extraordinary. This kind of resistance is not about force, but about constancy. It is the ability to remain aligned with God when nothing external encourages it. In practice, resistance means showing up every day. The teacher who teaches with dedication even when underpaid. The nurse who cares with love even when exhausted. The parent who remains present even when unseen. Each of these represents faith in action, because they reveal that trust is not conditioned on applause or reward, but on a conviction greater than circumstances. The beauty of resistance is that it shapes character slowly, like water carving stone. The world admires sudden brilliance, but heaven values endurance. A candle that burns slowly illuminates longer than a firework that dazzles for seconds. Faith that resists in the ordinary becomes unshakable in crises. It trains the soul to trust even when all else fades. This perspective protects from two traps: impatience and discouragement. Impatience demands immediate results. Resistance embraces process. Discouragement gives up when ignored. Resistance continues even in silence. Both traps are overcome by the conviction that God sees what no one else sees. The applause of men may fail, but divine recognition never ceases. An example of practice: set small acts of daily faithfulness. Read a chapter of scripture each morning. Choose integrity even in the smallest negotiations. Treat others with kindness, even when unnoticed. These habits accumulate into resilience. Over time, resistance turns into a shield against despair, and the criteria for sustaining this resistance are linked to how one chooses the object of faith. Because fidelity in the ordinary depends entirely on whether the object of faith can withstand the weight of trust. That takes us to the next point: how to discern wisely where faith is placed. Not every object of faith is worthy of trust. The intensity of belief matters less than the quality of what is believed. That is why discernment is necessary. How do you know if the object of your faith is safe? There are practical criteria. Ask, is it true? Does it align with reality, or is it just a comforting illusion? If the object cannot withstand criticism, it is not worthy of trust. Truth does not fear questions, it embraces them. Another criterion: is it good for me and for others? A faith that destroys relationships, enslaves consciences, or generates arrogance cannot be legitimate. Genuine faith produces what is beneficial, not only for the believer, but for those around them. Any faith that isolates, divides, or corrupts is suspect. The fruit reveals the root. There is also the criterion of beauty. Does this faith elevate the soul, or does it shrink it? Beauty here is not superficial aesthetics, but the ability to humanize, dignify, and inspire. A faith that justifies hatred or diminishes people may be intense, but it is not beautiful. And beauty matters because the Creator himself reflects perfection that is both true and good. Practicality demands another question: does this faith allow correction and repentance? False absolutes never tolerate change. They demand rigidity and submission. True faith allows reorientation. The God of Scripture welcomes the repentant and guides again. If the faith you follow crushes under failure instead of lifting you, it is not divine, it is oppressive. One more criterion: does it endure time? Trends come and go, ideologies rise and fall, but the object of genuine faith remains. That is why the faith placed in God survives generations, while faith in idols disappears along with the illusions they carried. The durability of faith's object reveals whether it was worthy from the beginning. A useful exercise: list what you currently trust: career, relationships, possessions, God. Then test each item with these criteria: truth, goodness, beauty, resilience, openness to correction. The result is revealing. It shows not only where your faith is anchored, but whether that anchor will hold in storms. And it is precisely in the storms of life that the difference between planning as faith in action and planning as idolatry becomes evident. Which leads us directly to the next point. Planning is not the opposite of faith. It is faith translated into strategy. To plan is to act as if tomorrow matters, while trusting that God guides the steps. But there is a difference between planning with humility and planning with idolatry. Humble planning recognizes that the future belongs to God, and therefore every plan is held with open hands. Idolatrous planning treats the future as guaranteed, as if one had control over time. One brings freedom, the other brings anxiety. Think of a farmer. He prepares the soil, sows the seed, waters the field, and organizes the harvest. This is planning, but he cannot control the rain, the sun, or the wind. Faith is knowing that even after doing his part, the final outcome belongs to God. Likewise, in everyday life, we should plan with diligence, but rest with confidence. The difference is not in effort, but in the attitude of the heart. When planning turns into obsession, it enslaves. People who idolize the future live prisoners of control, unable to accept surprises. They become frustrated when reality doesn't follow the script. But those who plan as an act of faith adapt, learn, and grow. For them, An unexpected change is not the end, it is a redirection. Faith makes them flexible because they know that nothing escapes God's sight. Practical example. In financial planning, faith means saving and investing wisely, but without turning money into an idol. In professional planning, it means studying and working with dedication, but without believing that one's value depends solely on titles. In relationships, it means cultivating bonds with care, but without treating people as possessions. Faith transforms planning into stewardship, not obsession. This perspective brings peace. Those who plan with faith don't cling desperately to results. They know that even if the path changes, the destination is safe. Their trust is not in the map, but in the guide. This posture produces resilience because disappointment does not paralyze but strengthens. They can look at failure as a detour, not a collapse. The scriptures themselves encourage planning, but warn against arrogance. You ought to say, "If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." The phrase is not pessimism, but wisdom. It is a reminder that life is fragile and only God is sovereign. Recognizing this does not weaken planning, it dignifies it, and this opens the way for the final reflection. In the end, everyone believes. The difference lies not in whether you have faith, but in what you place it in. The destination of life depends on the object of trust. Faith is not optional. It is universal. Even the skeptic who denies God builds their life on unproven assumptions. That reason is reliable, that memory is trustworthy, that the world has some meaning. The difference, then, is not whether someone believes, but what they believe in. And this choice is decisive because it molds destiny. Faith in the living God leads to restoration. Faith in false absolutes leads to ruin. The truth is simple: you will be shaped by what you adore. If money is your God, you will become restless and insatiable. If power is your God, you will become manipulative and lonely. If approval is your God, you will become fragile and anxious. But if the living God is your center, you will reflect his character: love, justice, peace, and eternal hope. The outcome of faith is the outcome of life. History confirms this. Civilizations that placed their faith in idols of conquest, ideology, or pleasure collapsed. Individuals who trusted illusions ended in despair. On the other hand, men and women who anchored their faith in God, though imperfect, left legacies of light, compassion, and transformation. The object of faith defined their footprints in history. A practical reflection: ask yourself, what am I becoming because of what I believe in? This question cuts deeper than mere theology. It is existential. If your faith is producing arrogance, cruelty, or emptiness, then the object is false. If it is producing humility, joy, and strength, then the foundation is safe. The fruit always reveals the root. This choice is not just individual, it is generational. What you believe in today will shape the children who observe you, the community you influence, the legacy you leave. That is why deciding the object of faith is not only about your personal journey, but about the story that will be written through you. The invitation is urgent. Do not postpone this decision. Indecision is itself a choice, and it leaves you vulnerable to being carried by the idols of the age. Only a deliberate, conscious, and firm choice for the living God guarantees a destiny of restoration. This is not a matter of intensity of belief, but of direction, and it is with this clarity that the entire journey of these reflections converges. Everyone believes. The only question that remains is, what is the object of your faith, and where will it take you? Faith can heal, but it can also destroy. The question is not whether you believe, but what you believe in. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden side of faith, how it shapes every choice you make, why even skeptics live by faith, and the terrifying dangers of misplaced trust. History proves it. Wrong beliefs have led entire societies into tragedy, but there is hope. True faith, anchored in what is eternal, has the power to transform lives, restore broken identities, and bring unshakable peace in the middle of chaos. If you've ever wondered, Can my faith be leading me astray? This video will challenge your assumptions, reveal blind spots, and show you how to redirect your trust toward what truly liberates. Stay until the end, because this message might be the turning point in your journey.